And joining me is one of the signatories to this open letter to the Prime Minister calling for an increase to JobSeeker, Professor Ben Phillips from the ANU. Professor Phillips, thanks for your time. First of all, why do you believe an increase is needed to JobSeeker?
So the Economic Advisory Commission, it took a good look at the JobSeeker payment. It compared it to lots of different metrics. So things like comparing it to the age pension, comparing it to, say, the minimum wage, comparing it to various poverty lines. And we did find that the situation's gotten a lot worse in recent decades. So, for example, compared to the age pension back in 1995, it was around about 90% of the age pension, the JobSeeker, and today it sits at about 65%. So because of indexation issues, because hasn't been increased as much as the age pension, we find that it's dropped very significantly. Financial stress rates are extremely high, much higher than other payments. And the poverty rate is exceptionally high, and the depth of poverty is also exceptionally high. So they're the main concerns and why it needs to be increased fairly substantially. And
in simple terms, it's $49 a day right now, and the argument that ACOS and others have made is that basically people on JobSeeker are having to make a choice between whether they pay their rent or buy medicine or eat.
Yeah, so it's currently around $49 a day. I think the call is to increase it to, I think it was high 60s, it might have been $68 or $69 per day. Still, as I said, it's about 90% of the age pension. I don't think anybody really thinks of the age pension as being a very large amount of money, so it's still lower than the age pension. And obviously, cost of living pressures are significant at the moment, as they have been for quite some time. Young people, young families, single parents, for example, who may be on that payment, will be struggling very, very severely. So a significant increase is needed. At the moment, it's just simply too low.
When basically every one of those dollars will be spent at a time of inflation, is that a risk?
Look, I think it's something
that it's inflationary?
Yeah, look, it needs to be considered, there's no doubt about that, but I think the total cost of increasing just JobSeeker alone is around $5 billion per year. That sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but compared to, say, the total economy, household expenditure each year is about $1,000 billion per year. So it's relatively small, and of course, to fund it, well, governments need to find money. So they might be taking money out of somewhere else. So it might be an increase in tax or something along those lines, which I think nullifies that sort of inflationary impact to some extent.
So should there be savings elsewhere to counterbalance any such increase?
Oh, look, that's a matter for the government. I mean, our task for the advisory committee really was what's adequate, and we found that 90% of the age pension would bring it to much closer to being adequate. But I think in the long term, yes, if you're going to increase the welfare spend, it would be an increase of about 4% on the current spend, which is about $130 billion per year. You need to fund these things. So you need to look into either spending less elsewhere or increasing taxes somewhere else.
And that would therefore help balance out or even do more than balance any increase in that sort of inflationary sense, which we're all looking at right now, given the rate cycle we're facing.
Look, I think $4 billion out of, say, $1,000 billion a year of spending is probably not going to be particularly inflationary. But you're right, there might be some impact. But it needs to be funded, whether that's through less spending elsewhere or whether it's through increases in taxes somewhere else, like whether it's superannuation concessions or it's trimming the stage 3 tax cuts. That balances out the issue, and I think it really negates that issue almost entirely.
Yeah, OK. Well, that's an interesting analysis, because obviously inflation and rates are very much pertinent at the moment. What's your view on the argument about returning the single parent payment from cutting off at the age of 8 for kids, for single parents, up to, say, 12, 14, maybe 16?
So I think primarily the issue is the JobSeeker amount. If the JobSeeker amount was increased to the 90% level, I think that issue largely goes away. But look, I think it was probably a fairly poor move by the Gillard government and the Howard government prior to that to cut off people from the parenting payment who previously was 16 back to 8. I think that's a bit tough. I think increasing it, whether that's 12 or 14, I don't have a strong view on it, but I think it probably should be increased. Whether 16 is the right age, I'm not sure. I'm also concerned about the concept of jobless families. I don't think the government should be encouraging, say, young single parents to be out of the workforce for a very, very long time. But I think certainly the 8 cut-off is probably a little bit too young, I think.
Through the work of the Economic Inclusion Committee, how widespread is poverty in Australia? Yeah,
so look, overall you've got rates that are around about, say, 15%. So it's about sort of 1 in 6, 1 in 7 households are in poverty. The JobSeeker families, though, it really is astronomical. It's more like 80% or 90%. They're almost entirely in poverty. And not just they're in poverty, but the depth of poverty is so severe. So the poverty line's about $1,050 per fortnight, and their payments are around $690 per fortnight. So they're a long way from that poverty line. And even what's been suggested is still actually underneath the poverty line.
It is it? Even if it gets it up to the 90%?
So I think we're talking about $9.50 per fortnight. I think about these things in fortnightly amounts, which is how they're paid. The poverty line, there's various measures, but the standard one, which uses ABS surveys, is around about $1,050. So you're still about 10% below that. So it's still a very small amount of money and a long way from the minimum wage, which is more like $1,500 per fortnight. So there's still a strong incentive to work. The difference is very substantial compared to the minimum wage.
And Professor Phillips, when living such a long way below that poverty line, it does impact the ability of an individual to go and find a job and to help their kids on their way as well.
Yeah, look, I think there's a balance. If you have it too high, obviously that's a disincentive to work. But if you have it too low, that's also got a range of problems which you've just discussed, that it's all of a sudden you can't afford to get a haircut, you can't afford to get ready for a job interview, you can't afford to get yourself to work, to interviews and whatnot.
Professor Ben Phillips from the ANU, great to get your insights.